It was a day like any other on Ganymede, bleak, dusty, and about as inviting as a tax audit. Captain Quillen stood at the entrance to the labyrinth, a jagged maw carved into the moon's rocky surface, and wondered for the umpteenth time why anyone would build a maze in the middle of nowhere. He scratched at the stubble on his chin, contemplating whether to send in the team first or follow the time-honored tradition of shouting, ladies first, and going in behind them. The air was thin, the kind of thin that made you miss Earth's pollution. Quillen had a team that looked like the last ragtag bunch picked for a game of space dodgeball. There was Bex, the engineer, whose sarcasm was as sharp as her tools, Jax, the medic, who was convinced every alien artifact was just a glorified coffee maker, and Tyro, the kid, who was either the biggest genius or the dumbest liability this side of Jupiter. All right, team, let's walk straight into the mouth of this beast and see what happens. What could go wrong? Quillen announced, waving his blaster like a drunk conductor at the Philharmonic. I'm betting on death by boredom, Bex replied, rolling her eyes. I mean, unless you count Tyro accidentally blowing us all up, which, let's be honest, is more likely. Tyro grinned, his teeth a flash of white in the perpetual Ganymede gloom. Hey, I only blow things up on weekdays. Today's Saturday, right? Oh, great, Jax muttered. We might live to see another Monday. Thank the stars for small miracles. The labyrinth was filled with the sort of darkness that seemed to swallow flashlight beams whole. As they crept through narrow corridors, the walls closed in like the universe's worst hug. Inscriptions covered the stone, their meanings lost to time, and several generations of lazy archaeologists who'd much rather decipher their bar tabs. Any idea what these say? Quillen asked, pointing his flashlight at a particularly elaborate set of symbols. Yeah, Tyro piped up. They say don't touch anything, you idiot. Sounds about right, Beck said, but let's ignore good advice, as usual. That's what we're best at. As they ventured further, the air grew colder, and the silence pressed in on them like a bad-in-law. Tyro, being the kid that he was, couldn't keep his curiosity in check. His fingers itched like an addict's for the nearest odd-shaped button or lever. Hey, Cap, you think this does anything? Tyro asked, eyeing a suspiciously large button that seemed to scream, press me. I think if you press that, it'll probably open a portal to hell or something equally festive, Beck snorted. Only one way to find out, Tyro said, shrugging. Before anyone could protest, his hand slammed down on the button. There was a brief moment of heart-stopping silence, the kind that makes you rethink ever letting teenagers on an exploratory mission. Then the ground trembled, not a gentle, apologetic shiver, but a full-on tantrum, as if the moon itself had decided to throw a fit. Oh, great, Quillen muttered. Is this the part where we die? Because I was kinda hoping for a few more disappointing birthdays. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a chamber that glowed with a sickly green light. It was the kind of glow you'd associate with mad scientists or radioactive waste dumps, not ancient alien architecture. Well, that's not ominous at all, Jack said, peering inside. The chamber was filled with odd contraptions, the kind that made you question whether aliens actually knew what functionality meant. In the center, a massive device hummed to life, its mechanisms a whirl of gears and lights. If that's not a doomsday machine, I'll eat my helmet, Beck said, crossing her arms. I'd pay to see that, Quillen chuckled. Tyro's eyes widened with a mixture of awe and what could only be described as an impending sense of oops. Guys, I think I might have screwed up. You think? Jack snorted. That's a first. Usually you're so sure. As the device hummed louder, the air vibrated with a frequency that made their teeth rattle. The walls of the chamber began to pulse, like a living organism waking from a long nap. All right, let's regroup and pretend we have a plan, Quillen said, taking a step back. Suggestions, anyone? Run, Beck suggested, already halfway to the exit. I like her plan, Jack said, following suit. Tyro lingered, his eyes glued to the device. But what if it does something amazing, like kill us? Quillen snapped. I'm not ready to meet whatever afterlife's waiting for me. I've still got a few debts to pay before I get there. With a reluctant nod, Tyro tore himself away from the machine and sprinted after the group, the vibrations from the device growing more intense with each passing second. As they scrambled back through the labyrinth, the walls seemed to close in even tighter, the darkness swallowing their panicked breaths. Behind them, the machine's hum reached a crescendo, a banshee's wail of alien engineering. I've always wanted to die in a crumbling labyrinth on a god-forsaken moon, Quillen muttered, really checking off the bucket list today. They burst out of the labyrinth entrance, the bleak Ganymede landscape looking almost welcoming in comparison. The ground shook beneath them, and a plume of dust rose into the thin atmosphere. Well, that was fun, Beck said, panting. We should do it again sometime, preferably never. Quillen leaned against a rock, catching his breath. All right, team, let's remember this moment as the time we almost got ourselves killed, courtesy of the kid. Hey, I learned my lesson, Tyro said, holding up his hands. Next time I'll ask before pressing the big shiny button. Next time, make sure there's no next time, Jax shot back. I'd rather face 1,000 alien death traps than deal with you going all button happy again. The ground continued to rumble, the vibrations spreading like a bad joke across the landscape. Whatever Tyro had set into motion, it wasn't stopping anytime soon. So what now? Bex asked, squinting at the dust cloud. Now we wait and see if we've doomed this moon, Quillen replied. And maybe send a message back to HQ, so they can send someone else to clean up our mess. Tyro looked at the labyrinth entrance, his face a mask of regret mixed with a hint of curiosity. You think it'll stop on its own? I'll bet your allowance that it doesn't, Quillen said dryly. But if it does, maybe we can call it a day and go grab a drink. I hear there's this place on Io that makes a mean Jupiter sunrise. Sounds like a plan, Bex said. I could use a drink after all this. Here's to surviving another day, Jack said, raising an imaginary glass. May our stupidity never catch up with us. They stood in silence, watching the dust settle, each of them pondering the chaos they might have unleashed. In the distance, the labyrinth loomed, a silent testament to human curiosity and its penchant for trouble. Well, team, Quillen said, breaking the silence, let's get back to the ship. We've got a long report to write, and I'm not looking forward to explaining this to command. I'm sure they'll understand, Bex said sarcastically. Who wouldn't love to hear that their best exploration team nearly blew up a moon? Quillen chuckled, shaking his head. Let's just hope it's the only moon we nearly blow up this week. With that, they turned away from the labyrinth, leaving behind the mysteries of Ganymede and the ominous hum of the ancient machine. Whatever happened next, it was out of their hands. But as they trekked back to their ship, each of them couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a very long, very dangerous adventure. They trudged back to the ship, their boots making crunching noises on the gritty surface of Ganymede. The air was still thin, and the silence was oppressive, like a lecture from a disapproving grandmother. Captain Quillen considered starting the report for HQ, but he figured they'd all earned a moment to enjoy being alive. Think we'll end up on some most wanted list for planets? Jax asked, fiddling with a loose strap on his medkit. For attempted moon murder. Great, just what I always wanted, Quillen replied. Let's add galactic criminals to our resumes. Beck snorted, picking at a smudge on her visor. What's next? Wanted for crimes against labyrinths. We could start a club. Tyro, trailing behind and looking like a kicked puppy, couldn't resist a last look over his shoulder at the labyrinth. Hey, if we're on a list, at least we'll be famous, right? Famous for stupidity, Beck shot back. Like that cousin who tried to grill burgers with a flamethrower. Their ship, the Garuda, loomed ahead like a rusted guardian angel, if angels were half-functional relics of a better-funded era. As they approached, a low rumble, softer now but insistent, echoed from the depths of the labyrinth. It was a sound that seemed to say, I'll be back, in the most ominous way possible. Is it just me, or is the moon holding a grudge? Jax asked, squinting back at the ruins. Because I swear it's planning a sequel. Yeah, and we're the stars of Labyrinth of Doom, Part 2, Quillen replied, this time with more running and even less oxygen. They climbed aboard the Garuda, the familiar, comforting smell of stale air and burnt coffee wrapping around them like a worn blanket. Quillen headed straight to the cockpit, collapsing into the pilot's seat as if gravity had suddenly doubled. The others followed suit, the tension of the labyrinth fading slightly as they settled into the cluttered but cozy confines of their home away from home. So, boss, Beck said, leaning against the doorway with exaggerated nonchalance. What's the plan, assuming we have one? Quillen sighed, rubbing his temples. First, we send a message to HQ. Let them know we've, awakened something. Jax plopped down in the co-pilot's chair, kicking his feet up onto the console. Awakened, that's a nice way to put it. Does it come with a snooze button? If it did, we'd have hit it by now. Twice, Quillen grumbled. The real question is, what do we do if HQ decides to leave us hanging out here? Become space hermits, Beck suggested. Or open a souvenir shop. I survived the Ganymede Labyrinth t-shirts are gonna be all the rage. Tyro, sitting cross-legged on the floor and fiddling with a piece of machinery, finally spoke up. Do you think it's possible? The labyrinth, I mean. What if it's like alive? The group paused, the air in the cabin suddenly feeling heavier. Quillen tilted his head, considering the idea. It wasn't entirely ridiculous. After all, they'd encountered sentient AI, rogue bots, and space Kardashians before. Why not a living rock maze? Well, if it is alive, it's got one hell of an attitude problem, Jack said. I say we call it Grumpy. How do you kill a living labyrinth? Bex wondered aloud. I mean, do you tickle it in the right spot, or do we need a giant can of maze spray? Quillen shook his head. Let's hope it doesn't come to labyrinthicide. For now, we sit tight and see what HQ has to say. Assuming they say anything, Bex muttered. They love ignoring us until we do something too big to sweep under the rug. The Garuda's comm system crackled to life, interrupting their conversation with the kind of static that made you think of haunted radios. Quillen flicked a few switches, coaxing the machine into broadcasting their report to HQ. The message was as follows: to HQ from Garuda. Encountered ancient alien labyrinth, possible sentient. Situation unstable, request guidance. Over. The static buzzed in reply, a symphony of white noise that told them nothing and everything all at once. They'd have to wait, a pastime none of them excelled at, especially with the threat of a moon-sized vendetta hanging over them. So what do we do while we wait for the universe to decide our fate? Tyro asked, looking up from the contraption he was dissecting. Stay alert, I guess, Quillen said, leaning back and closing his eyes. And maybe think about what we'll say in our defense when they ask why the hell we pushed the big shiny button. I'll take the blame, Tyro offered, shrugging. I mean, they always blame the kid, right? Only if you're the family dog, Jax chuckled. But in this case, sure, we'll throw you to the wolves. Or whatever HQ sends. The hours dragged on, filled with the kind of tense monotony that made you long for something, anything to happen. The crew took turns staring at the labyrinth through the ship's monitors, half expecting it to rearrange itself into obscene gestures. As fatigue set in, Quillen's thoughts drifted. He imagined the labyrinth as a grumpy old man, shaking its fist at the young whippersnappers trampling over its meticulously crafted paths. Maybe it was tired of being disturbed and just wanted a peaceful existence, free from human interference. He couldn't blame it. Suddenly, the ship's proximity alarms blared, the high-pitched wail slicing through the quiet cabin like a knife through butter. Quillen snapped awake, the others jolting upright with varying degrees of grace. What now? Bex groaned, rubbing her eyes. Did we anger another ancient moon? Quillen scanned the monitors, his heart sinking as he processed the data. Something massive was moving beneath the surface of Ganymede, a slow, deliberate shift that suggested the moon wasn't done with them yet. Oh, fantastic, Jack said, peering over Quillen's shoulder. Looks like Grumpy's got friends, or worse, Tyro added. Maybe it's just stretching. Stretching? Bex exclaimed. What are we dealing with, a yoga-practicing moon? Quillen punched a few buttons, bringing up the external cameras. The landscape outside was eerily still, the only movement the slight quiver of the dust as the ground subtly shifted. Whatever was happening, it was big and it was waking up. All right, Quillen said, his mind racing through contingency plans like a prospector sifting for gold. We need to figure out if this thing is hostile. Pretty sure a moon moving on its own qualifies, Jax noted dryly. Yeah, but what if it's just curious? Tyro suggested, looking alarmingly hopeful. Like, oh hey, new neighbors. Let's say hi by popping out of the ground, or by flattening our ship, Bex countered. I mean, how do you even say hello in moon language? With a rock slide apparently, Quillen observed. All right, everyone, gear up, we're going out there. Outside now, Jack said, incredulous. The moon's throwing a temper tantrum, and you want to take a stroll. We need to see what's going on, or we sit here and wait for it to squish us like bugs, Quillen said, standing up and stretching. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of getting squished. With reluctant nods, the crew suited up, their suits hissing and sealing with the promise of safety, albeit as much safety as one can expect on a moon that seemed to be waking from a millennia-long nap. They exited the Garuda with caution, the landscape a deceptive expanse of quiet once more. As they approached the labyrinth, the rumbles grew louder, a slow, rhythmic pulse that vibrated through their boots and into their bones. It was a sound of ancient, tectonic forces coming to life, and it was disturbingly synchronized, like a giant cosmic heartbeat. Okay, this is officially creepy, Bex said, eyes wide behind her visor. Anyone else feeling like a bug under a magnifying glass? Jax asked. Quillen led them to a higher vantage point, a small rise giving them a clearer view of the labyrinth. The sight before them was surreal. Sections of the labyrinth were rearranging themselves, the stones sliding smoothly into new formations with a grace that belied their massive size. It's reorganizing, Tyro whispered, his face a mixture of awe and dread, like it's solving a puzzle or. Rewriting itself for what? Bex asked. Is it trying to spell out get lost? Maybe it's trying to communicate, Tyro suggested. The kid's voice trembled with excitement, as if he just stumbled upon the secret to the universe's best knock-knock joke. I mean, what if it wants to talk? We could be the first to understand its language. Great, Jax said. I'll get my conversational ancient moon phrasebook. Quillen squinted at the shifting stones, trying to make sense of the patterns. It doesn't look random, but whatever it's doing it fast. The moon groaned again, louder this time, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. As the vibrations intensified, the crew exchanged uneasy glances, the humor fading as the reality of their precarious situation settled in. So, what's the plan? Bex asked, her voice barely audible over the noise. Do we just wait and see if it eats us, or if it's setting a trap? Jax added. You know, just in case it's hungry. Quillen shook his head, trying to focus. We need more data, he said, tapping his helmet's interface. Tyro, hook into the Garuda's sensors. Let's see if we can figure out what exactly is happening beneath the surface. Tyro nodded, crouching down and pulling out a portable interface, his fingers flying over the controls. The crew waited, the air filled with the low hum of the labyrinth and the beeping of the interface. All right, I'm in, Tyro said, squinting at the screen. There's definitely something, moving, like veins or tunnels, all crisscrossing beneath the labyrinth. And it's not natural, Quillen guessed. Not unless Ganymede decided to take up structural engineering, Tyro confirmed. So we've got a sentient moon labyrinth that's reorganizing itself, moving whatever's inside and possibly trying to communicate or something, Beck summed up with a grimace. Any suggestions that don't involve screaming and running? Quillen laughed despite himself, shaking his head. Let's keep the screaming and running as plan B. For now, we watch and wait. If this thing's alive and not just a giant rock Rubik's Cube, we need to figure out if it's hostile or just misunderstood. Misunderstood, huh? Jack said skeptically. Because nothing says I come in peace like rearranging your own geological features. Yeah, but in its defense, we did poke it first, Quillen pointed out. Let's give it a chance. With nothing else for it, they settled in, the labyrinth's mysterious movements casting shadows over the barren landscape. For better or worse, they were committed to seeing this through. Whether it was the first contact with an alien intelligence or the prelude to a moon-sized disaster remained to be seen. One thing was certain, Ganymede wasn't done with them yet. The crew of the Garuda stood awkwardly in the labyrinth's shadow like some mismatched band of reluctant heroes, not the sort you'd want saving your planet, but probably the only ones available on short notice. Captain Quillen was at the helm, leading them deeper into the heart of Ganymede's ancient, discontented network of stones that had taken up the unsettling hobby of rearranging itself. All right, gang, Quillen said, his voice muffled by his helmet but still carrying that confident lilt of impending disaster. We've got ourselves a living, breathing moon puzzle. Who's ready for a little cosmic Sudoku? Pretty sure I didn't sign up for lunar brain teasers, Jax muttered, clutching his medkit as if it might shield him from whatever Ganymede decided to throw their way next. And Sudoku's a stretch, more like crazy eights. Quillen ignored the grumbling, his gaze fixed on Tyro. The young crew member had that look in his eyes, the one that said he was about to do something either incredibly smart or incredibly stupid. Tyro, any ideas? You've got that knack for seeing things the rest of us miss. Tyro blinked, slightly taken aback to be the center of attention. Maybe. But we're talking alien architecture here, not Lego bricks. Hey, if there's one thing I've learned out here, it's that everything's basically just fancy Lego, Bex chimed in, tapping a boot against one of the shifting stones. Except the instructions are always missing. With a deep breath, Tyro crouched down, scrutinizing the labyrinth's movements. It was like watching a kid squint at a magic eye puzzle. The rest of the crew waited, their collective patience thinner than Ganymede's atmosphere. As the stones continued their mechanical waltz, a pattern began to emerge. Tyro pointed at the shifting monoliths, his excitement infectious. There, it looks like it's aligning in repeating sequences, like a lock resetting itself, or a Rubik's Cube, Bex joked. Great. My favorite kind of headache. Think of it as an alien invitation, Quillen suggested, the sarcasm barely masked. If we solve it, maybe we get a prize, like not getting squashed, Jack snorted. Some prize. What's next, a cosmic game of charades? Only if we're unlucky, Quillen agreed. All right, Tyro, you lead. We'll follow your gut. Tyro hesitated, then nodded, moving forward with the kind of tentative bravery usually reserved for first-time skydivers. The crew trailed behind, dodging stones that shifted underfoot, each step a gamble against geological grumpiness. As they ventured deeper, the labyrinth seemed to respond, the air resonating with a low hum that was unsettlingly close to a growl. Bex, ever the optimist in her own dark way, turned to Jax. Remind me again why we're not back on the Garuda eating questionable rations. Because we're idiots, Jax replied cheerfully, and because Quillen's got a thing for ancient mysteries and certain death. That too, Bex grinned, her helmet displaying the sarcasm for all to see. Suddenly, the stones shifted dramatically, and the ground beneath them trembled. It wasn't enough to knock anyone off their feet, but it was definitely enough to get everyone's adrenaline spiking. Okay, that's new, Tyro said, eyes wide as he surveyed the new configuration. The labyrinth was really showing off now, reshaping itself into what looked suspiciously like a maze. Did we just enter its funhouse mode? Quillen asked, voice flat despite the growing tension. Maybe it's trying to impress us, Bex suggested. Show us its best moves before it eats us. Whatever it's doing, it's not random, Tyro insisted, his fingers tracing invisible lines through the air as he tried to decipher the shifting paths. These alignments, they're guiding us. Guiding us where exactly? Jax asked warily. To the heart of the labyrinth, where it keeps its collection of stupid humans. Quillen shook his head, though his expression was thoughtful. Let's assume it's not malevolent just yet. Maybe it's leading us to something, or showing us the exit, Bex chimed in, ever hopeful in her sarcastic way. Let's hope it's not a dead end, Jax added, glancing nervously around as if expecting the stones to close in. They continued, Tyro at the helm, weaving through the alien construct with a growing confidence that seemed to come from a place deep within him, an intuitive understanding of what the labyrinth was, or at least, what it was trying to convey. The deeper they went, the more the labyrinth seemed to react, the stones rippling like a stone sea. Above, the sky started to darken, the thin atmosphere blurring the line between day and night. It gave the impression of entering a different world altogether, one where the normal rules didn't apply. So, what do you think this thing wants? Jax asked, breaking the silence that had settled over them. A chat, a cup of sugar, maybe it just wants company, Bex suggested, half serious. I mean, who wouldn't get lonely after a few million years? Lonely or not, it's definitely not subtle, Quillen said, watching the stones shift again, parting like a curtain to reveal a series of intricate carvings etched into the ground. Tyro knelt, tracing his fingers over the patterns. These are instructions, maybe, or a message. Great. We're about to get the moon's version of how to win friends and influence people, Jax joked. Whatever it is, it's definitely important, Quillen said, leaning over to get a better look. The symbols looked both familiar and alien, a testament to the inscrutable nature of what they were dealing with. So how do we figure out what it wants? Bex asked, her voice edged with frustration. Simple, Quillen replied. We ask, Jax echoed, incredulous. What you gonna knock on the moon's front door? Quillen gestured at the labyrinth, its movements slowing as if waiting. Maybe we don't need to, it's already listening. Tyro stood, turning to face the rest of the crew. I think it's trying to communicate, but it's slow, like it's trying to learn how. Great, we're teaching the moon how to talk, Bex said dryly. What could possibly go wrong? Hey, if it can learn stop and don't squish us, I'm all for it, Jax replied, adjusting his medkit as he spoke. Quillen nodded. All right, Tyro, you're our translator. Let's see if we can figure out what it's saying. Tyro took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment before focusing on the shifting stones. The patterns seemed to pulse with an energy all their own, a silent language written in stone. The labyrinth continued to move, its rhythm slow and deliberate, almost like it was waiting for some kind of response. Tyro watched, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the meaning, the purpose behind the moon's actions. Come on, Tyro, talk to it, Bex urged, her voice a mix of anticipation and apprehension. I'm trying, Tyro replied, feeling the weight of their hopes and fears resting squarely on his shoulders. As he stood there, the labyrinth seemed to shift, forming paths that led deeper into the heart of the moon. It was an invitation, a challenge, and a warning all rolled into one. Quillen glanced at Tyro, then at the rest of the crew. Looks like we've got our answer. We go deeper, and what if we don't like what we find? Jax asked, ever the realist. Then we run like hell, Quillen said with a grin. But until then, we follow the breadcrumbs. With that, they pressed on, deeper into the labyrinth, trusting in Tyro's instincts and the hope that whatever lay at the end of this bizarre journey had more interest in conversation than carnage. As they moved, the labyrinth continued to shift, the alien landscape reshaping itself around them. It was as if they were inside a living organism, its walls and floors pulsing with an unseen energy. Tyro's focus never wavered, his eyes scanning the stones for any sign of meaning, any clue as to what this ancient construct wanted. The rest of the crew followed, their trust in him and in each other unspoken but absolute. So what's next? Tea with the labyrinth, Bex asked, her humor a thin veneer over the tension. If we're lucky, Quillen replied. If not, well, I guess we'll find out. As they ventured further, the ground beneath them began to quake again, the labyrinth reacting to their presence with a new intensity. It was like being inside a giant clockwork mechanism, every gear and cog moving in perfect harmony. Anyone else feel like we're walking into a trap? Jax asked, his voice low but steady. Every step of the way, Quillen replied, but we've come this far. No point in turning back now. With grim determination, they continued, their path lit by the ever-changing patterns of the labyrinth. Whatever awaited them at the heart of this ancient enigma, they would face it together, for better or worse. As the stones shifted once more, revealing a path that led into the depths of Ganymede itself, the crew steeled themselves for whatever lay ahead. They were explorers, yes, but they were also survivors, and in the grimdark depths of space, that counted for a hell of a lot. In the end, whether it was the beginning of a new understanding or simply another strange chapter in their lives, they would meet it head-on. Because when you're stuck on a sentient moon with a crew of misfits and an ancient puzzle to solve, the only way out is through. The stones shifted once more, this time parting to reveal an entrance, an ominous gap framed by jagged rocks that seemed to leer like the gap-toothed grin of some ancient beast. The air inside was thick with foreboding, a gnawing silence that crawled up your spine and refused to let go. Welcome to the Hotel Ganymede, Quillen quipped, trying to mask the unease scratching at the back of his throat. Looks more like the basement of the hotel overlook, Bex cracked, peering into the darkness. Hope it comes with room service. Jax adjusted his medkit, a nervous habit that never seemed to leave him. If by room service you mean alien nightmares, then we've hit the jackpot. Tyro was already inside, drawn by the invisible strings of curiosity and youthful bravado. It feels different in here. Like it's aware. Great, now it's not just trying to kill us, it's taking notes on how, Jax muttered, following reluctantly. The air inside the chamber was cooler, a welcome change from the thin, dry atmosphere outside. It was like stepping into a forgotten tomb, the walls lined with intricate carvings that whispered their age-old secrets to those daring enough to listen. Nice decor, Bex observed. Very ancient civilization chic. As they moved deeper, the chamber opened into a vast hall. The ceiling was lost in shadow, the walls lined with rows of stone tablets that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. The sight was enough to make even the most jaded explorer pause in awe, or at least grunt in appreciation. Tyro moved closer to one of the tablets, his fingers tracing the glowing symbols with a reverence usually reserved for museum pieces. These are scenes, battles maybe, it looks like a story. A bedtime story from hell, Quillen said, squinting at the images. Our bedtime, their war. The images were brutal, depicting a conflict that spanned not just years, but eons. Beings of light and shadow locked in an eternal struggle, their forms shifting and merging like oil on water. Looks like they were really into war games, Bex said, crossing her arms. And I thought laser tag was intense, Jax snorted. Yeah, well, this doesn't come with a safety manual. As Tyro studied the carvings, something shifted in the air, a subtle distortion that made reality itself quiver. The ground trembled and shadows danced at the edges of their vision, twisting into shapes that seemed almost familiar. Bex frowned, rubbing her eyes. Anyone else seeing this, or did I forget to blink? Quillen felt it too, the creeping sensation that the very stones were watching, waiting. It's like the labyrinth is showing us something. A memory, maybe, or a rehearsal, Jax added, his voice tight. The shadows grew bolder, thickening into figures that moved with unsettling grace. They flickered in and out like a poorly tuned holo, each pass revealing more detail. Faces formed and dissolved, echoing the crew's own features with a mocking accuracy. Looks like we've got doppelgangers, Bex said, her tone dipping into gallows humor. Finally, someone who gets my jokes. Quillen waved a hand through one of the phantom images, only for it to shimmer and reform as if taunting him. This place is toying with us, testing our patience, Jax grumbled, watching his own specter mimic his every move. The air felt heavier, a pressure building that had nothing to do with the thin atmosphere. It was a psychological weight, the kind that gnawed at your mind and whispered doubts in the dead of night. So what, it wants to know if we'll break? Bex asked, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. Spoiler alert, I'm already cracked. Quillen forced a chuckle. If we're in a test, I hope it's multiple choice. Tyro's eyes darted between the tablets and the shifting shadows, his mind racing to piece together the meaning behind the chaos. He could feel the labyrinth's intent, its challenge, but whether it was a warning or an invitation was anyone's guess. I think it's trying to tell us something, Tyro said, his voice urgent. But it's like it's using a language we don't understand. Maybe we're in need of some universal subtitles, Jax suggested, his sarcasm not quite hiding the edge of fear beneath. The figures shifted again, the scene changing to one of desolation and ruin. A world, no worlds left in ashes, the remnants of the conflict writ large in smoldering craters and empty husks of what were once cities. Looks like the grand finale wasn't a happy ending, Quillen observed, his gaze fixed on the apocalyptic vision. Yeah, this is the kind of history lesson they don't teach you in school, Bex added, trying to keep her tone light despite the growing dread. The realization was slowly dawning on them. This was no mere simulation of past glories. It was a warning, one that transcended the petty squabbles of human understanding. So what's the play here? Jax asked, eyeing the spectral tableau warily. We just sit around and wait for the next act, or figure out how the hell we get off this rock, Quillen said, his mind already turning to the practicalities of survival. Before it decides we're not worth the trouble, Tyro's focus remained on the symbols, desperate to decipher their meaning. The labyrinth was speaking, its voice a cacophony of sights and sounds that demanded attention but offered little in the way of explanation. We need to understand what it's saying, Tyro insisted, his voice thick with determination. Before it decides to show us what it can really do. Quillen nodded, trusting in Tyro's instincts even as the shadows closed in, the weight of their presence a constant reminder of the stakes. All right, let's figure it out. Before this moon decides we're yesterday's news. The chamber seemed to pulse in response, the shadows retreating but not disappearing, never disappearing. They lingered at the edges of perception, a silent promise of what might come if the crew failed to answer the riddle of Ganymede's labyrinth. Jax let out a long breath. I'm all for solving ancient mysteries, but if this thing wants to test our sanity, it's gonna have to get in line, Bex snorted. Right behind life, taxes, and the Garuda's ration packs. With a renewed sense of urgency, the crew delved deeper into the chamber, the shadows whispering their silent challenge. They were explorers, yes, but they were also players in a game whose rules they were only just beginning to understand. As they moved, each step more deliberate than the last, the labyrinth seemed to react, its stones vibrating with a subtle resonance that echoed their determination. It was a dance of wills, the ancient construct testing their mettle with every twist and turn. You know, I almost miss the good old days, Quillen mused, his voice a steady anchor in the swirling chaos. When exploring meant a quick jaunt to a new planet and not dealing with sentient moon mazes, careful what you wish for, Bex replied with a wry smile. The universe has a funny way of making the next thing even worse. Don't remind me, Jack said, shaking his head. Just once I'd like to find something that doesn't want to kill us. The path ahead unfurled like a ribbon of shadow and stone, beckoning them into the unknown depths of the labyrinth. Tyro led the way, his mind a whirl of calculations and possibilities, each step carrying them closer to whatever truth lay at the center of Ganymed's ancient puzzle. The journey was far from over, the questions more numerous than ever. But they were determined to see it through, each of them driven by the shared hope that whatever waited at the end would be worth the risk. In the grimdark heart of Ganymed's labyrinth, hope was a scarce commodity, yet like the flicker of light on those ancient tablets, it was enough to guide them forward, one step at a time. The air was thick with tension, heavier even than the thin atmosphere outside, as the crew trudged deeper into the labyrinth's bowels. The oppressive weight of their predicament settled on their shoulders like a damp cloak, unwilling to be shrugged off. They pressed on, driven by a cocktail of desperation, defiance, and the grim realization that turning back wasn't an option. The labyrinth seemed to sense this, its stone corridors narrowing as if to squeeze the life from them. Walls crept inward, shadows danced with malicious intent, and every corner held the promise of new horrors. Anyone else feel like we're being watched? Bex whispered, the words barely a breath above silence. Always, Quillen replied. I just wish it would buy me dinner first. They continued forward, the path twisting and turning like the intestines of some ancient beast. Jax's knuckles whitened around his medkit, each step a testament to his nerves. He wore his anxiety like a second skin, always there, never quite fitting. I've seen haunted houses with better ambience, he muttered, eyes darting around. At least they have the decency to stay still. Yeah, well, this place has a mind of its own, Tyro said, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. And I'm not sure it likes us. No accounting for taste, Bex quipped, attempting to lighten the mood, though the humor fell flat against the suffocating atmosphere. As if in response to their unease, the labyrinth shifted. The ground shuddered beneath their feet, and the walls groaned like a beast disturbed from slumber. The crew stumbled, disoriented, thrown off balance by the sudden change. Bloody hell, Quillen cursed, regaining his footing. This place has more mood swings than a soap opera. Just need some dramatic music and we're set, Bex added, her tone flippant despite the fear lingering beneath. They regrouped, their path now split by the whims of the labyrinth. Ahead, the corridor forked into two equally uninviting options, each path shrouded in shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Great, more choices, Jax muttered, glancing between the two paths, as if our odds weren't already bad enough. Flip a coin, Bex suggested, though her humor was strained. Quillen shook his head, eyes narrowed as he considered their options. No, we stick together. Safety in numbers, or at least shared misery. Tyro, however, was already inching toward the path on the right, drawn by something he couldn't quite identify. It was a pull, an irresistible urge to delve deeper, to understand the secrets buried within the stone. Tyro, Quillen called, voice sharp. Don't wander off, but Tyro's feet seemed to have a mind of their own, carrying him forward despite the warning. His gaze was fixed on something just beyond the threshold, an unspoken promise of answers. I need to see, he said, almost apologetically, as though he owed an explanation for his curiosity. Curiosity killed the cat, you know, Bex pointed out, though she followed after him, unwilling to let him face the unknown alone. Quillen sighed, gesturing for Jax to bring up the rear. Let's not split the party. I'd hate to have to remember all your names at the funeral. With that morbid reassurance, they moved as one, stepping into the right-hand path. The air grew colder, a chill that seeped into their bones and set their teeth chattering. Tyro led the way, his eyes darting over the walls that seemed to close in around them. Each step brought new carvings into view, scenes of violence rendered in stark relief against the stone. They told a story, a grim narrative of struggle and loss, and Tyro felt a deep, unsettling connection to them. In that moment he realized the truth. The labyrinth wasn't just a test. It was a memorial, a monument to the futility of war, and yet buried within its walls was something more, something vital. These carvings, Tyro said, voice hushed in awe. I think they're trying to tell us something, like a puzzle. Great, I love puzzles, Jack said dryly. Especially the ones that can kill us. Tyro ignored the comment, his mind racing as he traced the symbols with his fingers. The labyrinth's message was there, tantalizingly close, but he couldn't quite grasp it. It was like trying to remember a dream just out of reach. I think this is the core of it all, he murmured, more to himself than the others. Core schmore, Beck said, peering over his shoulder. I just want to get out of here. A rumble echoed through the chamber, as if in response to their presence. The labyrinth was restless, its stone heart beating with a slow, malevolent rhythm that sent tremors through the ground. We're running out of time, Quillen said, his gaze shifting between Tyro and the ominous carvings. Whatever you're gonna do it fast. Tyro hesitated, doubt gnawing at him. He was no hero, no savior, just a curious soul in a place that demanded answers he wasn't sure he could provide. I don't know if I can, he admitted, the weight of his uncertainty heavy in the air. Hey, Beck said, her tone softer than usual. You're not alone in this, all right. We're all in deep shit together, and if you screw it up, Jax added with a forced grin, at least it'll be a quick death. Comforting, Tyro replied, though a ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. Quillen clapped a hand on his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. We believe in you, Tyro, or at least we believe you're our best shot. With a deep breath, Tyro steeled himself. He focused on the carvings, letting the labyrinth's message wash over him. It was a language older than time, a story etched in stone for those willing to listen. The shadows around them thickened, pressing in with a tangible menace. The labyrinth was losing patience, its whispers growing louder, more insistent. The crew could feel the weight of its gaze, an ancient intelligence assessing their worth. We need to make a choice, Quillen said, voice steady despite the mounting dread. Tyro, it's on you. Tyro swallowed hard, the enormity of the task daunting. But as he studied the carvings, something shifted within him. A spark of understanding, a flicker of insight that lit up the darkness. He reached out, fingers brushing against the cold stone, and began to trace a pattern. It was instinctive, a movement born of an intuition deeper than conscious thought, and as he did, the labyrinth responded. The walls trembled, a low rumble reverberating through the chamber as if in answer to his touch. The carvings glowed with an eerie light, illuminating the path forward. Well, that's new, Jack said, blinking against the sudden brightness. Guess you're not just a pretty face, Tyro, Bex teased, relief evident in her voice. Tyro let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I think this might be it. The path ahead was clear, the labyrinth's challenge laid bare. It was a test of will and wit, a gauntlet thrown down for those bold enough to accept it. Then let's move, Quillen said, taking the lead with renewed determination. Before this place changes its mind, they moved as one, following the illuminated path deeper into the heart of the labyrinth. The air hummed with energy, a subtle promise of both danger and discovery. The shadows receded, yielding to the light that pulsed from the walls, a guiding beacon in the oppressive gloom. Each step was a leap of faith, a defiance of the odds stacked against them. You know, Beck said, her voice cutting through the silence, if we make it out of this, I'm never setting foot on another moon again. Jax chuckled, a shaky sound that carried a hint of hope. I'll drink to that, assuming we find a bar that serves something stronger than moonshine. Their banter was a balm, a reminder of their shared humanity in the face of overwhelming odds. It was this camaraderie, this irreverent defiance that fueled their resolve. The path twisted and turned, the labyrinth's architecture shifting to accommodate their progress. It was as if the ancient structure was alive, breathing, adapting, testing their mettle with each new challenge. At the heart of the labyrinth, they found themselves in a vast chamber, the walls lined with glowing tablets that told the story of a civilization lost to time. It was a history written in stone, a testament to both triumph and tragedy. Tyro stepped forward, eyes wide as he took in the sight. This was it, the core of the labyrinth's riddle, the final piece of the puzzle that held the key to their survival. All right, Tyro, Quillen said, his voice a steady anchor in the sea of uncertainty. What's the play? The pressure was immense, the weight of their expectations a tangible presence at his back, but Tyro knew he couldn't falter now, not when they were so close. He studied the tablets, the glowing symbols a language he now understood. It was a message of hope, a blueprint for peace woven into the fabric of the labyrinth itself. I think I know what we need to do, Tyro said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. And that is, Bex asked, her gaze fixed on him with unwavering trust. Tyro took a deep breath, the answer clear in his mind. We need to complete the story, finish what they started. The symbols on the tablets shimmered with approval, the labyrinth acknowledging their resolve. It was a daunting task, a challenge that demanded everything they had to give. Well, no pressure or anything, Jax said with a rueful grin, just the fate of the galaxy in our hands. Quillen clapped Tyro on the back, a reassuring gesture that spoke volumes. We're with you, Tyro, all the way. With renewed determination, they set to work, their combined efforts focused on deciphering the labyrinth's final secret. It was a battle of wits against an ancient intelligence, a fight for their future etched in stone. The path was fraught with danger, the stakes higher than ever, but together they forged ahead, driven by the hope that their actions might just be enough to tip the balance. In the end, it was their humanity, their irreverence, their humor, their unyielding spirit that set them apart. It was this, more than anything, that guided them through the darkness, one step closer to the light. Do you ever wish you'd just stayed back on Earth and taken up something safe, like underwater knitting? Bex asked, her voice echoing off the stone walls as they trudged deeper into the ancient labyrinth. The air was so thin it felt like sipping disappointment through a straw. Only every time I wake up and realize I'm still alive, Jax replied, adjusting the medkit that seemed to weigh more with each step. But then I'd miss out on this delightful death trap in your charming company. Careful, Jax, Quillen said, throwing a glance back over his shoulder. Too much optimism and you might start thinking we'll survive this. Don't worry, Cap, Jax chuckled dryly. I wouldn't dream of it. They pressed on, the walls shifting subtly as if the labyrinth was considering its next move in a cosmic chess game, one where the pieces were expendable and the rules were designed to drive you insane. Tyro, still at the lead, was lost in thought, or perhaps just lost, as was the usual state of things. Hey, Tyro, Bex called, breaking his reverie. You look like you're contemplating the meaning of life, or at least wondering how to cheat it this time. Tyro glanced back, a smirk playing on his lips. Actually, I was just thinking about an old Earth game my granddad used to play. You know, that one with all the colored pegs and a board full of holes. Colorful pegs. Sounds like a psychedelic nightmare, Quillen said. Are you suggesting we start playing games now, because I'm fresh out of quarters? Not exactly, Tyro replied, tracing his fingers over the glowing symbols on a stone tablet. But it got me thinking, how the labyrinth's logic might work. Maybe it's like that game, breaking a pattern, finding the sequence. Congratulations, you've just remembered Mastermind, Bex said, rolling her eyes. Great. How does that help us not die? Tyro shrugged, his fingers continuing to dance across the etchings. I'm not sure yet, but it's something. Better than wandering around aimlessly until this place decides to rearrange us into the next mural. Quillen nodded, ever the reluctant optimist. Anything that keeps us from being a permanent decoration is worth trying. Let's think of it like an ancient alien intelligence playing board games with our lives. The labyrinth rumbled, as if agreeing or laughing. Hard to tell with ancient stone. Guess it's all about keeping your pieces on the board, Jax muttered, checking his medkit for the umpteenth time. As they moved, the walls seemed to shift less menacingly, almost as if Tyro's realization had given them some insight into the labyrinth's twisted game. But it wasn't just the discovery fueling their resolve. It was the camaraderie, the shared gallows humor that made each step bearable. You know, Beck said, her voice carrying a hint of genuine curiosity masquerading as sarcasm, if this thing is a game, what do you win if you beat it? A lifetime supply of air, a luxury suite on Hotel Ganymede. A free pass to never come back, Jax quipped, running a hand through his hair. But I'd settle for a hot meal and a cold drink. They reached a particularly intricate section of the labyrinth, the carvings richer, deeper, stories etched not just in history but in survival. It was a maze not of stone, but of choices made and lives lost. Tyro paused, inspecting the patterns, tracing them with a thoughtful frown. What's the play, Maestro? Quillen asked, crossing his arms. We're all ears. Tyro's eyes flicked between the symbols, a spark of understanding lighting up his gaze. I think if we follow this sequence here, it should open a path. And by should, you mean hopefully won't turn us into space dust, Beck said with a grin. Tyro nodded, a hint of determination hardening his features. Exactly. But if it's any consolation, I'm about 60% sure this won't be the end of us. 60%, huh? Jax said, raising an eyebrow. That's better odds than usual. Tyro worked quickly, moving from one tablet to the next, his fingers a blur of motion. The rest of the crew watched, the air tense with anticipation and the kind of apprehensive hope that bordered on desperation. Okay, moment of truth, Tyro said, stepping back to admire or dread his handiwork. The labyrinth seemed to hold its breath, the air thickening with a presence, as if the ancient stones themselves were watching. The structure shuddered, the ground vibrating beneath their feet as if the moon itself was giving them a nudge, urging them onward. The walls began to shift, revealing a new path. There we go, Quillen said, his voice echoing with relief. No space dust today. They moved forward, the path unfolding like a story finally told. And as they walked, the oppressive weight of the labyrinth seemed to lift, if only slightly. Each step was a testament to their resolve, their refusal to give in to despair. You know, Jack said, a crooked smile on his face, when we get out of here, I'm writing a book. Labyrinths and Laughs, How Not to Die in Space. Make sure to include the bit about intergalactic board games, Bex added. That's a bestseller right there. Now there's an idea, Tyro said, his eyes forward, never straying from the path. Just make sure the roiled is cover therapy. They reached another chamber, this one more open, less constricting. The air felt different here, calmer, as if the labyrinth had finally decided to play fair, or at least not cheat as blatantly. This looks promising, Quillen said, taking the lead once more. Let's keep moving. I don't want to overstay our welcome. The chamber was lined with more of the glowing stone tablets, each one a beacon of the past, a guidepost for the future, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there was still a glimmer of hope. It was a history they were now part of, a tale of survival that would be told if they lived to tell it. If these walls could talk, Bex mused, running a hand along the carvings, they'd probably tell us to get the hell out. Or they'd ask us to leave a review, Jack said. Great ambience, terrible service. Would not recommend. As they moved through the chamber, the air seemed to grow warmer, a gentle current guiding them onward. It was as if the labyrinth itself was easing its grip, acknowledging their tenacity, their refusal to be beaten. You know, Tyro said, his voice thoughtful, maybe this place isn't just a trap, maybe it's a lesson. A lesson in what? How to avoid ancient death mazes, Bex asked, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Or maybe a lesson in persistence, Quillen said, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. In not giving up even when the odds are stacked against you, the labyrinth rumbled, a sound that almost felt like approval, as if the ancient structure itself was nodding in agreement. Whatever it is, Jack said, his tone light despite the weight of the moment, I'm just glad we're still in the game. They emerged into another corridor, the path stretching out before them like a promise kept. The air was fresher here, the oppressive weight of the labyrinth lessened. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. All right, Quillen said, stopping to take stock. We're not out of the woods yet, but we're getting there. Let's keep up the pressure. One step at a time, Cap, Tyro said, his voice steady, resolute. And so they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they were not alone in this fight. They had each other, and that was enough. Enough to face whatever the labyrinth threw at them next. You know, Beck said, a grin tugging at her lips, if we pull this off, we should open a consultancy. How to survive the unlikely and the unthinkable. Sounds like a niche market, Jax replied, his eyes scanning the walls for any more surprises. But then again, there's always a need for experts in surviving the impossible. Right, Quillen said, his gaze steady on the path ahead. But first, let's make sure we actually survive this. Together, they moved forward, the light from the tablets casting long shadows that danced across the walls. It was a testament to their journey, a flickering reminder of the path they'd walked together, one filled with danger, humor, and the stubborn refusal to give in. As they continued, the labyrinth seemed to respond to their unity, its walls shifting to reveal new paths, new stories, and new challenges. But with every step, every shared joke and cynical observation, they grew stronger, proof that even in the darkest places, there was light to be found. Hey Tyro, Beck said, nudging him with her elbow. Think you can finish this game before our luck runs out? Tyro smiled, a hint of determination in his eyes. I guess we'll find out. But if not, at least we can say we went down laughing. Their journey through the labyrinth was far from over, but each step brought them closer to the end, to the moment when they could finally leave this ancient puzzle behind and return to the stars. It was a mission born of hope, driven by humor, and sustained by the unbreakable bonds forged in the face of overwhelming odds. And as they walked, their laughter echoing through the stone corridors, they knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, united, defiant, and unyielding. The labyrinth might have been a test, but it was one they intended to pass with flying colors, or at least with their trademark sarcasm intact. Let's keep moving, Quillen said, his voice a rallying cry that spurred them onward. We've got a story to finish, and I don't plan on sticking around for the encore. With renewed determination, they pressed deeper into the labyrinth, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them, and more than willing to laugh in the face of danger, come what may. The labyrinth closed around them like a bad joke that had gone on too long, with Ganymed's thin air doing its best impersonation of a vacuum cleaner. Captain Quillen led the way, dodging a freshly rearranged stone that seemed determined to rearrange his face. You know, I've had gentler hugs from my ex, he muttered, sidestepping another wall that shifted with the grace of a blindfolded sumo wrestler. So, Tyro, Beck said, her voice dripping with sarcasm and sweat, what's the plan now? Besides not becoming part of the local decor, that is, Tyro squinted at the carvings, which seemed to mock him with their cryptic dance. I'm working on it. This place is like a cosmic prank, but I think it's about patterns, cooperation, creativity, like some ancient alien's idea of a team-building exercise. Jack snorted, tightening his grip on his medkit. Great. We're in an intergalactic trust fall without the safety net. Just what I wanted from today. Hey, at least it's not Monday, Quillen said, trying to sound optimistic and failing spectacularly. He nodded at Tyro. You crack this and drinks are on me, assuming we find any that aren't flammable. Tyro moved from one stone to another, his fingers tracing familiar yet confounding sequences. The labyrinth seemed alive, shifting like it was trying to shake off a bad itch. All right, he muttered. You want creativity. How about we start playing along? With a flick of his wrist, Tyro rearranged symbols, his movements more intuitive than calculated. The air grew still, as if the labyrinth itself was holding its breath, an ancient entity waiting for the punchline to land. What's he doing? Jax hissed to Bex, who shrugged with an eloquence that spoke volumes of her confidence, or lack thereof, in their current predicament. Solving the unsolvable, I hope, Bex replied, her eyes fixed on Tyro's work with the fascination of someone who knew they were about to witness either brilliance or a really impressive explosion. The ground shivered beneath their feet, a low rumble that was half annoyance, half grudging respect. As Tyro slotted the last stone into place, the labyrinth let out a sound that was suspiciously close to a sigh. I think I did it, Tyro said, a note of disbelief in his voice. I think I actually did it. That, or you've just signed us up for a lifetime membership to the labyrinth, Quillen said, a grin tugging at his lips despite himself. The walls shuddered, then settled, revealing a path that looked suspiciously like a way out. It was as if the labyrinth, sentient or otherwise, had decided they'd suffered enough. Look at that, Jax said, eyes wide. The universe finally cutting us a break. Don't jinx it, Bex warned, but her tone was lighter, her steps quicker as they moved down the newly revealed path. The corridor widened, the air growing less oppressive, almost as if the labyrinth had deigned to cooperate now that they'd played its game. The stones were still, an eerie calm replacing the restless energy that had hounded their every step. So, Tyro, Quillen said as they moved, what's the big secret? How'd you convince an ancient death trap to play nice? Tyro shrugged, a weary but satisfied smile spreading across his face. I think it was a test. Cooperation, creativity, the usual human SH stick. Show the sentient maze we're not just a bunch of bickering idiots and it might let us go. A test, huh? Bex mused. Guess we passed. Maybe this place recognized something in us. Yeah, Jax added dryly. Insanity, because only crazy people would come here willingly. The path continued to open up, revealing a chamber that was eerily devoid of traps, tricks, or anything else liable to kill them. Instead, the stones glowed with a gentle light, as if acknowledging their perseverance. You think this is it? Bex asked, her voice quieter, almost reverent. Tyro nodded. Feels like it. And hey, we're still breathing. That's got to count for something. As they stepped into the chamber, the labyrinth seemed to draw back, its ancient malice dissipating like morning fog. They'd done it. Against the odds, they'd played the game and in doing so had found the way out. This is it then, Quillen said, looking around. The end of the line, more like the beginning of a new one, Tyro replied, his eyes alight with the possibilities of survival and what lay beyond this stone prison. All right, team, Bex said, clapping her hands together. Drinks on Quillen if we make it back to the Garuda in one piece. Correction, Jax interjected, grinning. Drinks are on Tyro. Without his genius, we'd be wall art. With a shared laugh that echoed through the chamber, they moved toward the exit, the glow of the stones lighting their path. The labyrinth, for all its ancient menace, had grudgingly accepted them, recognizing not just their survival instincts, but the very human qualities that had brought them this far. As they stepped out of the labyrinth, the cold air of Ganymede hit them like a slap, refreshing, real. The universe awaited, and they were more than ready to meet it head-on. Well, Quillen said, taking a deep breath, let's get back to the Garuda before this place changes its mind. Yeah, Tyro agreed, looking back at the now silent stones. Let's get out of here while we're still ahead. They headed towards the Garuda, their shadows stretching long and triumphant across the gritty surface of Ganymede. The labyrinth may have been a challenge, but they'd faced it with humor, sarcasm, and a refusal to give in hallmarks of their species, whether in ancient stone traps or the vastness of space. So, what's next? Bex asked as they walked, her tone light, hopeful. Same as always, Quillen replied with a smirk. Find the next big thing to survive, laugh in its face, and live to tell the tale. As they approached their ship, the familiar hunk of metal that had somehow seen them through more disasters than they cared to count, they felt the weight of the labyrinth fall away. They'd faced an ancient test and emerged intact, a testament to their resilience and sheer bloody-mindedness. And if we don't, Jax asked, half serious, half joking, then we make sure we go down with a bang, Tyro said with a grin. But not today. The Garuda loomed ahead, their rusted guardian angel ready to carry them back to the stars. They climbed aboard, shedding the fear and tension of the labyrinth like a second skin. As they lifted off, leaving Ganymede and its labyrinth of doom behind, they shared one last laugh, a sound of victory and relief that rang out among the stars. They'd won not just against the odds, but against the labyrinth's ancient, inscrutable design. To the next adventure, Quillen said, raising an imaginary glass. To the next laugh, Bex added, clinking her own invisible toast. To surviving, Jax concluded, his voice warm with camaraderie. Tyro, piloting them away from Ganymede, merely smiled, and to not ending up as space dust. With that, the Garuda surged forward, the vastness of space stretching before them, a universe full of unknowns, challenges, and most importantly, more stories to tell. And for this crew, that was more than enough. The end of one tale, perhaps, but the beginning of another. Because in this universe, survival was more than just a game. It was an art, one they'd mastered with wry humor and a whole lot of grit. And the stars, ever watchful, seemed to twinkle in agreement. As the Garuda skidded through the thin, biting atmosphere of Ganymede, it dawned on the crew that they'd done it. They'd outwitted an ancient labyrinth with a personality disorder and lived to tell the tale. Not that anyone would likely believe them. A sentient maze on a moon with air as thin as a politician's promise wasn't the kind of thing that made it into science journals. Back in the cockpit, Captain Quillen leaned back in his chair, which creaked a protest that probably doubled as a warning. He was the picture of ease, or at least the picture you'd get if you asked a blind artist for relaxed yet disheveled. "Well, folks," he said, "seems like we've survived yet another poorly thought-out mission. Drinks are on me if we ever find a bar that's open." Bex, whose sarcasm had become a survival mechanism, shot him a look that could peel paint. "I don't know about you, Cap, but I'm thinking of taking up a safer hobby, like juggling chainsaws or knitting." Jax, ever the pragmatist, clutched his medkit as if it were a talisman warding off more insanity. "I don't know what's worse," he said. "The fact that we just spent hours dodging death, or that I still can't feel my toes. Both are disturbing in their own right," Tyro noted, his fingers flicking across the controls with a dexterity that suggested he'd rather be doing this than solving alien puzzles. "But let's focus on the positives. We're alive. We've got the Garuda. And we don't have to explain why there are scorch marks on the ship's hull." "Yeah, about that," Bex interjected, her gaze narrowing on Tyro. "How exactly did you sweet-talk that labyrinth into letting us go? I'm not buying that whole teamwork crap." Tyro shrugged, his expression equal parts smug and sheepish. "Maybe it had a soft spot for underdogs. Or maybe it just got bored of us, kind of like how I feel right now," Jax said, his tone dry enough to start a fire. Quillen, never one to miss an opportunity for gallows humor, grinned. "Cheer up, Jax. It's not every day you get to outwit a colossal death trap. Surely there's something in our contract about hazard pay, right?" Beck snorted. As if we ever read the fine print. Their banter trailed off as they steered the Garuda away from Ganymede's surface, the moon becoming a memory, albeit a particularly obnoxious one. Below them, the labyrinth lay quiet, its purpose fulfilled or forgotten, leaving the crew to puzzle over the implications of their adventure. "Do you suppose anyone else knows about this place?" Bex mused, her voice carrying a hint of something that wasn't quite sarcasm but could pass as curiosity. Quillen mulled it over, scratching at the beard he'd cultivated through sheer negligence. "Probably, but my guess is they didn't make it out to file a report." "Optimistic as always, Cap," Jack said, rolling his eyes. "You ever think about how ridiculous this all is? An ancient maze on a dead moon, us bumbling through it like a bunch of idiots," Tyro offered helpfully. "I was going to say explorers," Jax corrected, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Bex leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if the answers to life's great mysteries were written in the rust flecks. "It's like the universe's way of telling us we're not as smart as we think we are. We're just another species fumbling in the dark." Quillen chuckled, a low, knowing sound. "True enough, but we're the species that laughs at the dark, too, and sometimes we even get the last laugh." The cockpit fell silent for a moment, the hum of the engines the only sound. They'd faced the labyrinth and won, not through brute force or superior intellect, but through stubbornness, sarcasm, and a touch of luck. And maybe, just maybe, the labyrinth had seen something in them worth acknowledging. "You know," Tyro said, breaking the quiet, "there's a lesson in all this," Bex snorted. "Oh great, here comes the moral. Let's hear it, Tyro, enlighten us." He grinned, unfazed by her jibe. "The universe is one big cosmic practical joke, and we're the punchline," Jack snickered. "Hell of a joke." "Yes," Quillen agreed, looking out at the stars. "But at least we're still laughing." As they drifted further from Ganymede, the enormity of their experience began to settle. They'd survived the labyrinth, yes, but they'd also come away with something more, a shared understanding of their absurd place in the universe and a respect, however grudging, for the forces that conspired to remind them of it. "Think we'll ever go back?" Bex asked, already knowing the answer. Quillen shook his head. "Not if I can help it. We poked the bear and lived to tell the tale. Let's not press our luck. Besides," Tyro added, his eyes on the stars, "there's a whole universe out there full of things to poke. And maybe," Jack said, leaning back with a sigh, "next time the things won't be trying to kill us." "Now there's a thought," Bex laughed, the sound bright and defiant. Their laughter echoed through the Garuda, a testament not to their victory over the labyrinth, but to their refusal to let it define them. They were explorers after all, navigating a universe that was as bewildering as it was beautiful. All right, let's set a course, Quillen said, his voice light with the promise of new adventures and inevitably new follies. We've got a lot of story left to live, and with that they surged forward, leaving the labyrinth behind as a mere chapter in the grand, ridiculous saga of human endeavor. They were ready for whatever came next, armed with humor, sarcasm, and the unshakable belief that as long as they could laugh, they could survive anything. Because in the end, that was the real trick, to keep laughing, even when the universe seemed intent on punching you in the gut. And if there was one thing the crew of the Garuda knew how to do, it was laugh in the face of impossible odds and come out the other side with a grin and a story to tell. As they set their sights on the next unknown, ready for the adventures and misadventures to come, they knew one thing for certain. Wherever they went, whatever they faced, they'd do it together, with a joke, a jibe, and a hearty "what the hell, let's see what happens." To the absurd, Quillen toasted, raising an imaginary glass. To the unknown, Bex added, her laughter like a challenge. To us, Jax concluded, his grin full of the warmth of camaraderie. Tyro simply smiled, steering them onward into the boundless, unpredictable vastness of space. There was no telling what awaited them, but that was the point, wasn't it? To dive headlong into the chaos, to laugh at the absurdity, and to keep moving forward, one ridiculous step at a time. And so they did, the Garuda cutting through the stars, its crew ready for anything the universe could throw their way. After all, they'd beaten a labyrinth. A few more cosmic jokes weren't going to stop them. Not now, not ever.